Hello there. It's the girl Valerie Mason Chase, and I have my cookie man with me today. So, he's always a cut up. What can I say? So anyway, welcome. Even though, Frank, our business and the podcast and all is called Marriage Beyond the Breach.
Okay.
We cover a lot of different topics. Because it's all about family. Anything that pertains to family, anything that pertains to life and relationships, we're going to talk about it. And tonight, we are going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart. The name of the topic is Reading is Fundamental. And it's all about reading and literacy. And I have two amazing authors who are going to be with us on this evening. I know how I got my passion for reading and education came from my mother. What about you, babe?
Well, as you say that, I thought about, as a kid, one of my first books, and the first book that comes to mind,
which one?
Dr. Seuss, Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Unlike my
Charlotte's
wife,
Web.
right? I don't read as much, except the newspaper from the sports section to the middle and stuff like that. I get my world events from the newspaper. I'm still old school about the newspapers. But reading is something that is essential to the development of children. And, I can remember all those times when the kids were little, sitting somewhere, making sure they have a book. Even now, when I tell my grandchildren, they say, Grandpa, I'm bored. I said, read a book. Of course, what happens? Right? They frown. I don't want to read a book.
Absolutely. So I have, as I said, two guests that are going to be with us this evening. I'm going to bring on our first guest first, because even though he has a challenging situation this evening in the Aggie spirit, he's, in case you don't know, you better ask somebody, but North Carolina A&T State University, we are called Aggies, and we have Aggie pride all the way. So I'm going to bring on our first guest, none other than Mr. Trey Hadrick. Hey, brother, how you doing?
Hey.
Aggie pride.
Aggie pride. Even though we were there at different times, but listen, an Aggie is an Aggie is an Aggie, and that Aggie pride lasts for a lifetime. So I just want to thank you, brother, for being here this evening. And before we get started, I want to read Trey's bio. So Ernest Trey Hadrick III is a father, school counselor, and community leader in Norristown, Pennsylvania. For more than 15 years, he has worked to advance the lives of young children, teens, and their families. He currently serves as a school counselor at Central Montco Technical High School and an adjunct professor at Villanova University. Trey has spearheaded numerous initiatives to increase parent engagement, equity, career preparation, and organizational development. He has shared his trademark, SEEDS, SEEDS, and we're going to talk some more about that later. Seeds of Leadership Philosophy as a TEDx speaker, you go, Trey, and guest on several programs and podcasts. Trey is a member of the Epsilon Pi chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Q-Dog all the way. And a former Division I athlete playing for Auburn University as well as North Carolina A&T State University. He has completed postgraduate studies at Wilmington University, and Trey has recently been appointed to the Pennsylvania State Board of Education, which serves 501 school districts. So big congratulations to you, brother. Outside of his work and community service, Trey enjoys spending time with his wife and son. So welcome, Trey Hadrick. And again, thank you so much for being here. So I want to ask, first, let me share your book. And there's a part 2, Trey's book, Cheese Steaks and Clippers. Okay, Cheese Steaks and Clippers. That's Trey's book. And then there's a Cheese Steaks and Clippers part 2, which is kind of a sequel to this book. So what led you to become an author, Trey?
So first, I just want to say thank you for having me. Before I answer your question, I always like to say that from the beginning, even though we usually say it at the end as well. For you out to me to allow me to share my message here tonight. I actually became an author as a challenge from a coworker.
Okay.
Some challenges, and I didn't get a position I wanted, and like, well, you should write children's books. You would be a great author. Social and emotional as a school counselor. Ways to bring people together, and I wrote down some notes, and from there I met with some people, and they gave me some ideas, and a couple people signed on to be part of my creation team, as I call it. To help me bring my ideas to life. I just told my that it was all about telling my story, and then from telling my story from a educator side, I almost felt like writing a book is like doing an album from side, right? So it became fun, it became engaging, and became something that I could leave my legacy and my mark with, and that's where my whole authorship, has begun and began from there. And like you said, I'm on my second book, Cheesesteaks and Clippers, Making Change, which is about financial literacy as well.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So it sounds as if until that particular event happened, you did not have being an author in your mind.
Not at all. That wasn't even a thought, And they say sometimes things happen for a reason, and gotta follow that path and just keep moving forward. And it worked itself out, and it ended up being a hit. The first book sold over 1,500 copies. I was really fortunate, in the heat of the pandemic. We published the first book on May 28th, 2020. And it went hot fire. So I'm very, very thankful.
So Trey, tell us about your book and how did you choose the subject you did?
So my book is based upon, and just the storyline itself, based upon the barbershop within the Black community, which is like a hub. It's almost like a community center, as everyone knows. And you learn so much, you meet so many people. The reality is, it's like walks of life, come through the barbershop and teach you so much. Sometimes like, for example, a religion, if you're one denomination, right, only those people are there, or I don't know, depending on your income level, right, sometimes only certain people are allowed to go to certain functions, and stuff as such, right? But a barbershop, very, very similar to a school, right? And not always in the school, because depending on equity and income as well, right? It might be the same, but in that barbershop, everybody comes through, right? So you learn so much. And my childhood barber, Lamar Buddy Epps, he was just a beacon of light for me at a young age. But I watched and witnessed from him serving and helping people. It just meant so much, and I wrote that after him.
Wow.
I mean, that is so true about that barbershop. Everybody comes throughout the week, and as a kid, you start to hear all these engaging stories, some of the history, how to conduct yourself as a young man. There's so many stories in a barbershop where you can kind of put them all together and, in a sense, and write something about it.
Absolutely.
Because your organization or your company is called Marriage Beyond the Breach. In the story, the first book in particular, it talks about a boy taking a girl out on a date, and the barber makes a joke like, I didn't see the last boy who took her out on a date. Right? Basically saying, like, you better be mindful of how you respond and how you treat her, and how you because her daddy's not going to play with you. So it's just another way to say, like, things are all tied together, right? That's a lot of you all probably do within your company, helping people in type of situations.
Yeah. And what you're saying about a barbershop, because that's the equivalent of a beauty salon for us females, because there's a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of life happens in those environments. And I think in a barbershop, especially for young boys, being there in the presence of older, mature, and hopefully wiser men, they learn a lot about life. They can learn a lot about what it means to be a man, particularly if it's a young boy who doesn't have a dad at home or a father figure. those gentlemen in the barbershop can fill in that role for him in some regard.
Correct. And I think that's where, as an educator myself, I believe that we have to learn ways to connect with those hidden gems in people's communities.
Mm-hmm.
Where the father might not be present every day, but a male figure might be present, or someone they look up to. And we got to find out who that person is for that child, and use that person as a springboard to help motivate that child and move forward, right? With the permission of the parent, and doing all the right, paperwork. But that person could be such an asset by just have their ears, to the situation for that child.
Yeah. So, Trey, I'm wondering, who is your favorite author and why?
Ooh. My favorite author. So, if I was being politically correct, right, I might say, write the Bible, right? The best author ever. But, in a honest way, I would, besides saying, I know God is my foundation and everything. So true, right? But honestly, one of my favorite authors is Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read that book, and I wasn't a big reader, honestly, until I left college, believe it or not. And I started finding like self-help books and motivational books. But that book there, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, like really changed the trajectory of how I looked and viewed life in a lot of ways. And even in my TED Talk, I even mentioned him, beginning with the end in mind. That's one of my E's and the seeds. And, that was so powerful when he talked about going to the funeral and, you walk up to the casket and it's you. Like a backwards by design. Like now you got to look at your life backwards and how do you want people to remember you? And it started like motivating me like to think like that. Like how do you want people to remember at that moment when you're no longer here? So for me, my favorite authors, in general.
Yeah, I like that idea of looking at your life from the end, because I recall in one of my ministry classes, we had to write our own obituary. That was challenging. And what we would want our obituary to be up to that point. I think when I was in the School of Ministry at Change Church, that might have been 2019, 2018-ish. And initially it was challenging, but I had to just really reflect on not just my life up to that point, but how I wanted my life to continue from where I was then to in the future. Because listen, I wrote my obituary as if I died at 100 years old.
Yeah, but you know what though? And I think even that could be challenging for some kids, right? I'm thinking from an educator standpoint, but such a powerful activity of doing that, right? Because even if you did write it, if you were 100 years old and what would you want to accomplish in life, that actually is to set goals.
Yes.
So even if most people don't live to 100, but you've actually put goals in forward for kids. So goals that they're seeing, but in a serious manner, and this will have to be like maybe late high school, a certain age where kids can really understand life at a different, maybe even college. But I think that's a powerful activity, actually.
Yeah, it was. It was very profound and enlightening to a lot of us, because we as adults, we don't always engage in the level of self-reflection that I think we should. That could be helpful to us.
I think sometimes we might even be afraid to self-reflect. Because then you got to face some shortcomings, some some challenges that, for me, sometimes if I think about self-reflection or challenges for me sometimes frightens me, because a lot of times I think about failure. So, that self-reflection could be challenging for me.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm going to challenge that because see, I'm not a fan of saying failure, because even when something has occurred that you may perceive as a failure, if you learn something from that thing, whatever it is, it was worth it.
Right.
So it wasn't really a failure. Anything you can learn from, to me, is not a failure at all.
Okay.
So anyway,
so Trey,
that's my 2 cents.
No. I like Sometimes, and I might have to, they say try to find a way to combine the two.
Uh-huh.
I was taught failure is feedback. So I think it's the same.
Okay.
I like that.
Right.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, I think that,
and when I use it, I promise to give you credit. Okay.
You don't.
Trey, so tell us about Seeds of Leadership and the North Sound Men of Excellence.
Sure. So the Seeds of Leadership, which are the acronym that I use for my TED Talk. During my TED Talk, I described how bamboo grows from when I was a person learned that when you put bamboo seeds in the ground, you put them in the ground, you water them for like 5 years, and it takes like after the 5th year, from 5 to 10, that's when a bamboo shoots up in the air, right? So I try to show like that when you're developing as a leader, right? It takes time, right? You have to water things, you have to dig, you have to check the soil, and then at a certain point, almost that I would say as a blessing with this new position I have, like that bamboo shoots through the air, right? And everybody's like, where'd that come from? But paying attention to that, that hard work, that constant watering when it didn't look like anything, right? And that's I built that into the Seed. So Seed stands for sacrifice, end game, equity. It was equality, but I really meant equity, development, and strategy. That's my Seeds of Leadership. And I built that into my TED Talk just to talk about what I think those 5 things are so important when you're trying to be a leader. Learning how to sacrifice so you can make the right decisions. Talking about the end game. We just spoke about that with Stephen Covey. Equity, how you're looking at situations. When you're working with children or people in your community, development, constantly developing your skill set as a leader. Often we get to a certain point, if we've made it, just get a little stale. You got to constantly move forward. And then strategy. I was taught chess in 3rd grade by a man by the name of David Swank. And when I learned that back then, it just taught me how to look at life differently. And that was really, but like when I learn it and look at it now from chess and chess moves and how people operate and you view other people, you can see how people like make strategic moves to be successful. So I think as a leader, that allows you to have the same, success. And then North Sound Men of Excellence, that was an organization that I started with a group of friends, a nonprofit, back in 2011, 2012, but 2011. And, we just were like a lot of young Black and brown males, for the most part, who were coming back to our hometown, giving back. Some of us were college degree holders, and often in our community, it's not, most people who make it usually don't come back, right? We always teach that, like, when you make it, don't come back. And the more I grow, I feel like we have to teach, like, when you make it, you must give back something and then back, right? Like, do something. Like, if everybody gave a year of volunteer work to their hood or their community where they're from, just 1 year after, college or tech school graduate, whatever it may be, I mean, it would just help so much tremendously going forward, right? So these guys were all back home. It was like 30 guys per se, different ages. And we just started doing work, turkey drives, and we did after school programs with STEM, and we did football clinics, and we did award banquets. I mean, it was just, a lot of work. We raised over $30,000. Like, it was just constantly doing some, tremendous things in a short period of time. And I was the leader of that mission for the first 6 years. And then my term was up. And then another gentleman took the reins of the president. And now it's in another gentleman's hands at this point. But we did some great things. It doesn't have the enthusiasm at the moment like it did at one point. But it's still alive, and I'm just proud of that after making 10 years.
Wow. That's great. And I agree. Having a mindset to give back in some way, because sometimes we think, oh, I don't have anything, I have nothing to offer. We have our time, even if we don't have anything else. And time actually is our greatest resource, more than money, more than anything. Because, we can always make more money, but we can't get no more time. Our time, that's it. So I love that what you said about giving back. And that was a saying back in the day. Okay, you make it out, you stay out, you don't come back. But then what happens to those who are left behind?
There you go. And we can't really say that whole lift as we climb if we say make it out and don't come back. Right. We always say lift as we climb, African proverb. and we say that often, but then we just keep going and don't look back. So,
right.
We have to change that and say almost, and I can't tell people how to live their life, but it's almost like if you don't give back, we look at you differently.
Yeah.
Something like that to hold people accountable who make it out to give back.
Yeah, that's good. I just want to give a shout out to Penny, and she said she agrees that feedback is very important for personal growth. So thank you for that comment, Penny, and anyone else. If you have any comments, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And of course, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the YouTube page. And I'm going to put Trey's link tree if you are interested in contacting or communicating with Trey in any way. This is his link tree information, and there's a lot on there because he has accomplished so much. So write that down. Use that information. I encourage you, for those who are on now and were not on before, you can get his book on the link tree. You could find his website. His book is Cheese, Steaks, and Clippers, and there is a part 2, Cheese, Steaks, and Clippers as well. I encourage you, and there is a way, if they want to get an autographed copy from you, Trey, how would they do that?
If they just reach out to me, I can connect with them, and they can purchase directly from me, and I will sign the book and mail it off. So that's the problem.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to bring on our next guest, Miss Jacquelyn Leon.
If I could for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry.
What was sticking in my head is what you said about seeds and learning to play chess with someone. I can remember neighborhood guy, Mr. Jacobs, learning to play chess. And as a kid, you're not thinking about what it really means in terms of sacrifices, because in the chess game, there's strategy, and there's times when you have to sacrifice to move forward. And the strategy comes in, okay, what am I willing to sacrifice to get to my end goal, which is to capture his king and win the game. Yes. So I as you said that, I said, wow, as simple as it was when I learned to play it, what it really meant, moving pieces on a chessboard is like moving through life. You have to sacrifice things, maybe even in your family, to accomplish goals that you're looking for. There's movements to it. It takes time. There's always something going on in life that ties into what you talked about.
So true.
That's good.
It's very, very, very true.
So before I bring Jackie on, I just want to ask you about, because I watched on your Instagram when you were at the event and you were talking about your appointment to the Pennsylvania Board of Education. For those of you who are just tuning in, Trey has been appointed to the Pennsylvania Board of Education, and just offer him some congratulations, because that is a significant achievement. But when I watched you speaking, you started talking about your auntie and her influence on you. So can you just share a little bit of that?
So I both sides of my family, well, my father's side is quite a few educators. My mother is my first educator. She was a public school educator for 35 years, I believe. Mom with me now. We're actually on our way to a little vacation. So I thank you for being patient today. But she was my first educator. But on my father's side, there's quite a few educators. So education has been paramount in our family for so long. But my aunt, she was a special education teacher who dealt with, what they describe as the emotional support students, and they loved her to death. So, and often people speak about that label of children, because I hate labels, but just being reality of what the system is. And speak about those students being the most challenging ones to work with. And she did a tremendous job, and she just was a supporter of me, and of all of her nieces and nephews, her 2 children and her grandchildren. She loved kids, and it was just important for me to see, because recently she died suddenly, and very challenging for
condolences.
Yes, man. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. But it was one of those times where it's like, what, we have to make sure that we honor our ancestors, right? I wanted to make sure I did it immediately, so I didn't want to take any time to think that I need to, a year from now and this and that. No, like it has to be done right away so that we can make sure that we keep the legacy alive.
Yes. And what you said is so profound, and it really resonates with me, because that's something that is always in the back of my mind, honoring my ancestors and honoring their legacy and the sacrifices that they made for me to have the life that I have now. And what I would always say to my children is that the sacrifices that our ancestors made, they did so knowing they would not experience any of the things that they were fighting for.
Listen, let me tell you something, and I know I got to go soon, but I'm going to tell you something that's so powerful, what you just said. And I had a conversation with my cousin recently, and I said that we are not our dreams. We are the dreams of our ancestors. Like everything that I'm doing now is not about me and my dream, because like they said, when you get tapped for things and when you get opportunities, you're like, where did this come from? But this is people who prayed on you, prayed over you, prayed these opportunities for someone of their lineage and their family and their history, and just being thankful for this is just beyond, so I just can't, think that I'm doing this on my own, right? It's impossible, so I'm so big on that statement.
Yeah. So I want to bring on our other guests now. And again, let me just show it one more time. That's the link tree to connect and to contact with Mr. Ernest Hadrick III, where you could purchase his book. You could read blogs. You could go on his website and just get an overall view of the accomplishments and achievements that he's made throughout his life and his career. So I am going to now bring on the dynamic, the beautiful, Miss Jacquelyn Leon. I'm always, when I have conversations with Miss Jackie, I'm always impressed by her. And I just want to bring her on. Then I'm going to read her bio. Hey, Jackie. Unmute yourself, sis.
Hola, buenas noches.
I don't know what to say, but muy bien.
Said hello, good evening.
Okay. Buenas noches. Señora o señorita?
Señorita.
Señorita, right? Because I know one is for married, one is for not. Okay. So Jackie, let me read your bio. So Jacquelyn Leon, MPH, founder of Locally Made, Globally Grown. Jackie is an educational thought leader, action advocate, wanderlust, and author. In her various roles over the past 25 years as a bilingual Espanol and English professional in the fields of public health and education, Ms. Leon champions equity from a lens that enables social justice. She is the founder of Locally Made, Globally Grown, an education-based consulting company. Locally Made, Globally Grown creates impact in the areas of program development, policy, training, technical assistance, and tool development. Ms. Leon brings an at-promise work approach. This mindset expands opportunities for dialogue, understanding, growth, and improvement. Locally Made, Globally Grown partners with forward-going organizations to create culturally affluent communities which lead education and learning toward global opportunities. When founder Jackie is not working, she's headed to an airport. Her love of travel has taken her to over 40 countries around the world and counting. Jacquelyn is also a burgeoning author who wrote and self-published her first book, Yo Soy, I Am, a bilingual Espanol and English cuento or story about about how a child's name came to be through history, culture, family, and love. And this is the copy of Jackie's book, Yo Soy, I Am, and it has English and Spanish in her book. So Jackie, welcome, and thank you again for your agreement to appear here with us on this evening. I much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gracias.
I'm going to put up Jackie's website. Give me a moment. There it is. That's Jackie's website. So, Jackie, I'm going to ask you some of the same questions that I previously asked Brother Trey. So, what led to you becoming an author?
I've always been an avid reader. I love books. Growing up, I was at the public library pretty often, a few times a week. They always had programming there. I still go there. I still have a library card here in Trenton. It's much more affordable than Amazon. But I've always loved to read. And, you know, for us educators, it's about windows and mirrors. And that's what books provide to us, you know, windows into a world that may be unfamiliar to us, and mirrors reflecting back to us, you know, our own existence and our own experience. So yeah, I've always been an avid reader, and I've always been told that I'm a good writer. And it took me a while. It took me into adulthood to recognize my own strength. But finally, I had a reason to tell a story.
Okay. And so, Frank, what do you have to ask Jackie?
Jackie, tell us about your book and how you chose the subject you did.
Absolutely. So again, you know, writing has always been on the forefront. I've always wanted to be an author. I've tried to author books several times, and it just didn't come naturally. For one reason or another, it wasn't the story to tell yet. And so when my niece was expecting her first child, I said, this is the time. I want to share my culture. I want to honor who she is, a bicultural, who she will be at the time, a bicultural product of African-American and Latino culture. And growing up, especially in schools, you choose one, right? Like, what are you? What are you? And you're pressed to choose one. And in this global society, it's so important for us to embrace our entire authentic selves. And I wanted my great niece, Kyla Susana, to know not only about her history, but her family and her language, that she could be everything and all of it. And so I wrote a book about my great niece, Kyla Susana, who I am always in love with every single day. We walked the Brooklyn Bridge yesterday. We were stuck in traffic, and I said, let's pull over. Let's pull over and walk the Brooklyn Bridge. And it was amazing to see the sunset.
Wow. And you also take your great niece on vacations with you.
Yes. So we are going through the alphabet together, A through Z. She is 6 years old, and she's been to 5 countries. I believe she said 5. She's been to Mexico, Puerto Rico, Bahamas, St. Lucia, and Aruba.
Wow.
Aruba now twice, Puerto Rico twice, and Mexico twice. So, but yeah, our goal is to get through the alphabet together. She chooses the country. And so we get to, you know, before we travel, we learn a little bit about the country.
Wow. That's beautiful. And I think that is so great, because there are so many teachable moments and opportunities to educate her throughout the travel, because it's not just about having fun. It's also about a learning experience as well. Yes.
Absolutely. And I mean, I might get in trouble here, but you know, I love education. I'm in education. But I tell her that the learning happens outside of the 4 walls in a classroom. And that point became so salient during COVID, right? Learning does not only occur in the 4 walls of a classroom, but actually mostly occurs outside of a school. And so, you know, it's important for us to innovate how education happens. It's important for us to innovate how particularly our Black and Brown communities have access to opportunities. You know, so we talk about gyms, swimming out into the ocean. You know, we talk about science, you know, like the sun rays. We have these conversations. Of course, she goes back and tells her mom she doesn't have to go to school because she's already had gym and science and, and math. We talk about spending money. When she goes, Diti, why are you working? I'm like, girl, I'm working so we can go on trips. So we talk about money. And so these are all important topics. And I always impress upon her that, when we're out in the world, it is about learning.
Yeah. So my daughter, Sadell, just said that your great niece is more travel than she is. But that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And, Jackie, I love that you included English and Spanish in your book, along with a good bit of history. So why was that important for you to include that in your book?
Absolutely. So a few reasons, actually. So typically when we are reading a book, it's read in English or it's written in English. And then there's some wonky translation into Spanish. And, it is so important for us to talk about bilingualism as a superpower. Here in the United States, 49 of the 50 states have the seal of biliteracy. It's a state seal of biliteracy that recognizes the importance of English and another world language. But more than that, by speaking Spanish, I can speak to nearly 500 million people around the world. Wow. That's powerful. That's really powerful when you think about the connections I can make across the world. The United States is one of very few countries that are monolingual. Most countries around the world have more than one official language. And a fun fact is the United States has no official language.
It's true.
And so, when we think about English, we had indigenous languages spoken here first. We had Spanish spoken here first. We had all these languages spoken before American English, right? Because this is an English that's very different than the English that came from Great Britain. And so when we think about bilingualism and the power of connecting people and the power of recognizing, just our similarities, again, the United States is, I would say, one of its weaknesses, that we're not educating our students, our youth, to embrace language in a much more, not only substantive way, but as an integral part of living. And so again, finally, there's a movement around the state seal of biliteracy, where 49 of the 50 states have this recognition. A high school senior can earn this recognition. However, we always have to be vigilant about education in this country. And I say that because the majority of the students earning the seal are native English speakers from upper socioeconomic status, right? And so, for example, a student speaking Polish or a student speaking Gujarati or Spanish can enter a U.S. school and come out of our school system speaking English and not maintaining their home language, right? And so there's a disservice there. And so there's inequities when we think about who should or could learn multiple languages, and who could or should benefit from having an additional world language. And so for me, writing in Spanish, the book was written in Spanish and translated into English, is very important. If you read the book, Spanish is first, and English, right? So it was a very intentional move to say, nope, we're gonna write this in Spanish first. And when you read the English version, you'll see some words that were left in Spanish intentionally again, right? There's some words that just don't translate, right? Like,
that's in
true. My household, we don't say grandma, we say abuela. It doesn't matter. Even my cousins who speak only English say abuela, right? There's certain words that my niece, aguacate, I don't even know if she knows how to say aguacate. It's an aguacate. So there's certain words that just don't translate. And it's also a way for us to honor one of the many languages that come from Puerto Rico.
Yes, I'm especially struck by when you were talking about a student who enters the educational system speaking one language and learning English in the educational system, but then not holding on to their native tongue. That is something that it kind of hurts my heart. And I envy individuals who have the ability to have that culture. Because those of us who are so-called African Americans, we got the American part, but we don't have the African part. So when there are individuals who have that and let it go and don't pass it down to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, I feel that it is such a loss. And I think that they're doing a disservice to the future generations, because eventually, if it's not taught, it's it's going to be lost. Mm-hmm. That aspect of who they are, because it's so much a part of who they are. Our two of our grandchildren, Emmy and Eli, their grandfather, their maternal grandfather is Moroccan, and his native tongue is Arabic. But my daughter-in-law and her sister, my daughter-in-law Liz and her sister, don't really know Arabic, because I said to her when my first when their first child was born, are you going to teach Emmy and Eli? Are you going to teach them Arabic? I think it's something that it will be great for them to learn, because that's a part of who they are, a part of their culture. So yeah, that bilingualism, I think, is something that definitely should be pushed. So I'm in agreement with you on that.
So who is your favorite author and why?
Before I answer that, I do want to respond to Valerie, because again, I want to make sure that the onus is on our education system and not our families, right? It is intentional and by design. So I'll say this. Our enslaved, ancestors who were brought to this country were the first multilingual folks on this land, right? They came from different tribes in Africa. They made stops along the Caribbean. They picked up language there, and then they came here, and they had to mix, African language with Caribbean language with, language that was here. So when we talk about, quote unquote, broken English, it's like, no, that's us being multilingual, right? And so that has to be said, because we need to make sure that education in this country is by design, right? And it hasn't afforded Black and Brown communities to really thrive in our whole linguistic repertoire. There's this phenomenal woman, Cami Anderson, who talks about her experience. She has an organization and she writes a book. It's called Bilingual Brown Babies. And she talks about that experience, that first experience being an African American and going to Colombia and going, wait a second, these Black folks look like me, but they're speaking Spanish, right? And so I did want to respond to that, because yes, it is a disservice, but the disservice isn't from our families, it is from our education system, right? So I just want to share that. In terms of favorite authors, I have a bunch, and I've evolved in terms of like who I like and what I read. My first most impactful was a Chicana writer, Sandra Cisneros. She wrote Woman Hollering Creek. And I was probably a teenager at the time that I read that. And it talked about like gender roles, and it talked about, like domestic abuse. And it talked about all these powerful things that happen in the Latino community, but that aren't spoken about, right? So I was really drawn to the power of her pen and how she was able to tell this story about just this dynamic, these dynamic events that happen in our community, right? And, another favorite author, later in life is, oh my God, Lorgia. I am blanking on her name right now. She wrote Community as Rebellion. She's one of the newer authors that I'm reading. And, she talks about the concept of la única, right? Like being in a predominantly white space, you're only allowed to have like one Latina, one person. You know, there can't be too many of us. Right. And so she talks about like just her journey in academia, and that's always been hit home for me because, you know, I've been in academia for a long time. And, you know, she talks about her experience in Harvard, you know, and not being tenured, and that's like real. And then we have like, you know, stories from like Malcolm Gladwell. I love Malcolm Gladwell. You know, he wrote Talking to Strangers. He wrote The Turning Point. He, you know, he wrote all these classics that we know about, but I do think he's a prolific writer as well. And, you know, we have our first Puerto Rican state author, who's Willie Perdomo, New York's poet laureate, who's Willie Perdomo. And I love his stuff because he's like an Afro-Boricua, you know, from East Harlem, and just like says it as it is. So it ranges for me depending on like the mood.
Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely just love reading.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jackie. And it sounds like you are extremely well read. I want to give a shout out to my daughter. She just said, I think all children should be exposed to other languages at an early age. Kids are sponges when they are young. And not only does it expose them to different cultures, it gives them an upper hand and skills that they can use later in life. Yeah, that's very true, baby girl. That is very, very true. It's an advantage.
It is, and people don't talk about it. It's, you know, bilingual individuals earn more money.
Yes, that's true.
It is a health benefit. They're less likely to have illnesses related to the brain. So it delays neural illnesses. It also helps with analytical thinking. Another person to really look at is Dr. Q, and Will Smith actually did a documentary on him, a Mexican American who's one of the world top neurosurgeons. And he talks about the bilingual brain, right? But he talks about his experience, and it's a dynamic one because he used to hop the fence, right? And come back and forth between Mexico and the US. This was his childhood. And he would hop the fence to the US to work on a farm, and they had to work with these tools that he credits his skills in the surgery room to, you know? So like he was able to translate his skills in agriculture to his skills as a neurosurgeon, right?
Wow.
And so, yeah, so it's important for us to make those connections, right? And not to like discredit a person's like lived experience, right? Because there is a path and there is a connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I spoke, I think I was speaking earlier about how my passion for reading and for education began. It's really from my mom, who was born in Virginia, 1920. She thinks she had about somewhere between the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade education. She wasn't sure, because back then there was one big room and everybody was in there, from the youngest, who was knee high to a grasshopper, to the oldest one, and with one teacher teaching everybody. So she's not sure how much education she really had, but she was a strong proponent for education. That's something that she instilled in us. And I remember when I went away to college, 17, away from home for the first time, and I would call her up. I'm crying like a baby. Oh, I want to come home. I want to come home. And she would say, no, baby, stay there. She kept telling me, it's going to pay off. You need to get your education. It's so important. You will be so glad. I said, I know it's hard now, but at the end, you're going to be so glad that you stayed there and you stuck it out, because your education, no one can ever take that away from you. And, you know, she was so right. It was difficult being away from her and being lonely and all that stuff, but broke. I can't forget that.
We're just talking about that.
Yeah, broke, poor, because what I said to my husband, we were talking about it the other day, and I said, when I entered into undergrad as a freshman, I had shoes that had cardboard in them. My shoes had holes and I had cardboard and I had only maybe 2 pair of pants. But my mother would say, but baby, you are there with everybody else. You are there with everybody else. You are getting the same education as someone whose parents have a whole lot of money and they have all this wardrobe and they have no idea what it is to put cardboard in your shoes. And I didn't realize then, I couldn't see what she was saying, but later on, I said, you know what? Mama is absolutely right. She was absolutely right. So even though she didn't have formal education, she was wise. She was smart. She was intelligent. And she instilled the significance, the importance of education in all of us. So I'm wondering, Jackie, what would you say is the source of your passion for education?
We share a similar background. My mom is the oldest of 10. It was my oldest uncle, and then my mom. They were the top, the 2 oldest of 10. So my mom's education also stopped at 4th grade. She had to help support the family. She had to take care of her younger siblings, and she also had to contribute to the household with, a job. She came here at 27 with no English. And, to me, it's a fallacy here in the US, again, to talk about formal education and not give credit where credit is due, because, she, to this day, she's still, to me, like a mathematical genius, right? And it's really sad that others couldn't see that and tap into that. When I laugh at myself going into a grocery store, picking 5 things and paying $67, and she, raised us on public assistance. She is a couponing queen. Like, I've physically have seen her bill go from $127 down to $13. I've seen it happen, right? And, she wasn't able to help us with homework, but she always made sure food was at the table so that we could do our homework, right?
Right.
I don't ever remember growing up and not thinking I was going to college, even though we never talked about how I was affording college. I don't ever remember like college not being an option. She raised 3 of us, 3 females, single mom. We're all college educated. And I knew from a very beginning, she didn't have to say it, right? Like back then, your parents didn't have to say it, right? They looked at you and you knew, right? It's not like today, but we just knew that education was also the way out, right? It was the way out of the projects that we grew up in. It was, the way out of like our monetary situations. It was just a way out of a lot of things that we were in. Hindsight, I will say that there was also just a lot of benefit to growing up in the hood, right? Like to your point, we learned how to like make $1 out of 15 cents, right? We just learned how to make a way. And it makes us stronger for that. And obviously for that, I thank my mom. But I will also say that as an adult, I now view education very, very differently, right? And, that's also what I impress upon my niece, particularly because what happens in our schools isn't always to the favor of our Black and brown kids, right? So we need to make sure, one of the few times that I clashed with my mom is, my mom coming over as an immigrant, it was like, school is always right. School is always right. And I've always had a bit of a rebel side to me. And I'm like, school isn't always right.
That could be a whole nother broadcast.
But, I always push back. And luckily my mom had enough faith in me and who she raised to say, okay, I can hear you, and I get it. She wasn't always comfortable because pushing back with authority isn't always a good feeling, especially when you don't speak the language, right? But she always had my back, and that's important because while I had phenomenal teachers, I also had teachers who said, you won't amount to anything because this is where you came from,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important to recognize as well, to make sure that our kids understand like the full meaning of education, and it isn't just about schools, right? And we hear our Secretary of Education now, right, pushing back on the very system that he leads. And that's super important to recognize that education definitely happens at home, at school, traveling abroad, on the streets. And that's the part where we have to recognize that even our kids who may be in a not so straight path right now, are smart as hell. And how we interact with them has to be in a respectful way so that they can also recognize their own strength.
You just said, education kind of begins at home. And, a question for you is something we did early on was read to our children and encourage them to read. How important is this practice in the life of a child?
I have to reflect. I was brought up in a book poor home. We had a set of encyclopedias that we got from the secondhand store.
Right.
That's what you did. My mom had her little stack of books that were, like prayers, oraciones, right? Prayers and things. But in terms of a practice, yes, it is important. However, it doesn't have to be a book. It could be, what we did have was records. It could be the back of a record, right? I know you don't have records anymore, but it could be the receipt, at the grocery store. It could be a magazine. It could be, like my niece, my great niece is not a lover of reading. However, I show her something about travel, we are reading. We are reading. And so again, reading is important. What you read, it's up to you. Books are also important, but I'll share this with you. One of the reasons that I did write a book is because in the publishing industry, which is also why I self-published, only about 13% of books are published about a topic related to a person of color. Out of that, only about 7%, these figures are a few years old, but about 7% are actually written by a person of color, right? So think about what we read and what we're exposed to. And so when we're saying to our kids, read, there's not a lot of representation out there that really describes our lives and that looks like us, right? In school, I read a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of, 1984 and a lot of the classics, which may not be of interest to our kids these days.
Yes.
So rather than read, I encourage, my niece and I are working on my second book, her first book. I encourage our children to write.
Yes. And, interesting what you said. You said about 13%. And I know that is one of the reasons why I'm very intentional with our grandchildren.
I was about to say
that the books that I get for them are about children of color and people of color. I think important. Did I lose my? My internet got crazy there for a minute, but I think it's back. You can hear me okay, Jackie? Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead, baby.
No, I was about to say that, thinking about when our kids are growing up and you're talking about what we read. Are there a reflection of ourselves? And you had to be very intentional. And I can remember when our kids were growing up, my wife was very intentional to what they read. If there were pictures in a book, did it reflect what they see as themselves in the mirror? And that is now carrying over to our grandchildren.
Yeah. I think that is invaluable that children see positive images and read positive things about people who look like them, because they're going to get enough of the other. But it's so important that they get those positive messages. And I'm just going to say this also, because as a woman of color, hair also, it's a big thing. You know,
I don't know about that.
No. Well, you ain't got no hair. But as a woman of color, with having a daughter who is now a woman of color and grandchildren who are children of color, the girls is important, because growing up, you would always hear this thing about quote unquote good hair. And here it is, it's 2023, and there are some people who still have that mindset. And it can do a lot of damage to a young girl's and a young woman's self-image. So I think it's important to have books that reflect that as well, speaking positively about our natural hair and about our natural appearance and all that. So Jackie, tell me about locally made, globally grown. Talk to me about that.
So the business itself is a homage to who I am, and also a play on the city I was born and raised, which is Trenton, New Jersey. And we have a bridge that boasts Trenton makes the world takes.
Yeah.
And similarly, I live by that motto. I'm locally made here in Trenton, but I'm globally grown, which is, all the experiences around the world really contribute to who I am, how I view the world, my perspective, the lens I bring into the work I do. And, also thinking about we as a Black and Brown community being the global majority, right, doesn't often get talked about here in the United States, who label us as a minority. And so, there's a lot of re-education that has to happen. And so as a business, I work with schools, I work with organizations, I work with private companies that are on a mission to diversify. And, what I'll say is that most companies are not ready for this work, right? There are some.
They just think they are. They think they are, but they're really not.
I don't even think that they think they are. I honestly think that, there may be a checkbox to mark, there's a compliance piece to it. And then there's also, you want to look good. But then there are those companies that really do want to, and to your point, do not understand the work it takes.
Yes.
Right. Another person that I love their work is Barbara Love from the University of Massachusetts. And she talks about that. She talks about us as a culture. We see the problem and we want to fix it, right? We don't want to go backwards to recognize the root. We don't want to take the steps forward to figure out, what it will take to actually fix it. No, we want to jump to just fix it. And so when organizations or companies hire me, they want that quick fix. And I'm like, that's not quite how it works, but we'll get started. And so locally made, globally grown does believe in the mission of working with companies who want to do more than just forward think, right? We get stuck in that thinking part. And so the phrase forward going is, again, an attribute to, we're going to do more than just think about it. We're going to put things into action.
Yes.
We're going to create this climate and culture that's culturally affluent, right? When you talk about like that social capital sometimes have to do with your environment, but there's a cultural part to your environment that we often, don't attribute to the assets that we bring. And so I was born in Trenton, New Jersey. People look at this city and it's like, it's dilapidated. And I am a champion for this city.
Yes.
I left, I came back. I'm a homeowner here. I invest in this city. I'm a community advocate here. And I'm just a proponent of what this city is and can grow into and revitalize. And so my company looks to do that in local settings, and to really take into consideration the different folks and the different viewpoints that can grow, whether it's a school or organization or a company, into something pretty dynamic and amazing, the way the world is supposed to be.
Exactly. Yeah. We can, right? So there's an event coming up in Trenton in August, and I know you are part of the organizational team for that event. Talk about that.
Yeah, we just spent the whole day planning it, or one of the meetings today. So the Trenton Puerto Rican Community and Friends, I'm one of the vice presidents, and we are planning the Trenton Puerto Rican Parade August 9th. It's a Sunday. We invite everyone. We are intentional about our name, Trenton, being the city that we honor Puerto Rican, our cultural roots of the organization, but the extension into community and friends, right? It's in our name that we want to form community with our neighbors, that we want to welcome our friends, not only to learn about our culture, but for our culture to learn about yours. And, you know, again, embracing that concept that we learn from each other. We are not meant to do things individually. We are meant to do things as a village so that we are not exhausted by our efforts. And also just recognizing the, you know, contributions that different communities have brought to one another. You know, when we think about, you know, the African American community, you know, we learned from the Black Panthers. We had the Young Lords learning from the Black Panthers, right? We had like the Chicano community and the Filipino community. These, we're all one big global family, you know, and when we think about our ancestral roots, and unfortunately how, you know, colonization kind of stopped along the way, but, you know, we have to go back to honoring our roots and recognizing that this division is created intentionally, and that we need to rise above it.
Absolutely.
So Sunday, August 9th. We'll see you there.
Sunday, August 9th. I will be there with my grandchildren, as many as I can bring. If I'm bringing all four of them, I'm going to have to bring some help. That younger one, that Eli, he's a little spitfire. In fact, they should be coming in any minute. The other two are here already. So Jackie, what advice or encouragement would you give to someone who is considering writing a book, whether it's a children's book or not a children's book, especially someone who falls into the category of a Black or brown person? What would you say to them?
I say just write. Don't think about grammar. Don't think about, you know, the rules of writing. There's enough space for you in this world, in this writing world. Your contributions are of value and belong. And I would say, you know, if you're thinking about the publishing route, don't get discouraged because it is a challenging one. I highly recommend Kweli, Kweli conference. It is a conference for Black illustrators and writers.
Spell that for me again.
Kweli,
Kweli.
Kweli.
And it's a conference?
It's a conference in New York City. It's pretty empowering conference. But again, I just say write, you know, share it with a select group of peers, get their response and feedback. You know, does it resonate? You know, when I was writing mine, I knew I wanted at a certain reading level. So I went to some of my educator friends, you know, I shared it with some young folks, you know, is it a story that resonates? So create your own focus groups. It doesn't have to be anything formal, and publish. People want to read your stuff. Whatever your stuff is, people want
whatever your stuff is. So I just want to say again, this is Jackie's book, Yo Soy, I Am. And it is in Spanish and English, both in the book. And Jackie indicated that she was very intentional about making sure she wrote it in Spanish and then translated it into English. I think that is fantastic. And I'm going to put up again Jackie's website, Locally Made, Globally Grown. You can contact her, go to that website. And I want you to support my sister, purchase her book. If you want a autographed copy, you can let her know. I have my own, and I have autographed copies for all of the grandchildren. And even though our previous guest had to leave us because he was in the midst of traveling, and I appreciate him still showing up, even in the midst of all those challenges. Trey Hadrick, his book is Cheesesteaks and Clippers. This is part 1. And he also has a part 2 to this book, Cheesesteaks and Clippers. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're watching now, or those of you who will see this later, reach out to them both and support them both, because that's something that we need to do also, is to support our own. It's time to get beyond the lip service, and like the old folks used to say, put your money where your mouth is and show some support. And also come out to Trenton, New Jersey on August 9th for the event that Jackie just talked about. So Jackie, thank you.
I'm sorry, I am awful. I don't even know the date of my own parade. It is Sunday, August 6th. I apologize, y'all. I don't know where August 9th came from. It is Sunday, August 6th.
August 6th.
Sunday, August 6th. There is a whole weekend of events. The 4th, a concert at the Merced County Fairgrounds. The 5th, a movie right here at Trenton Thunder. And then the 6th. Okay. Sunday, August 6th is the parade.
So that's the culmination of all the events throughout the week. Now, is there a link or a website or something where they can go to list all of the functions and events that are taking place throughout the week?
Yes, follow us on Facebook, Trenton, Puerto Rican Community and Friends.
Wait, hold on. I just messed up. I'm trying to make another. I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay, I did that one. Maybe. Oh, there it is. Trenton. I'm going to write it down. Trenton,
Puerto Rican Community and Friends. Follow us on Facebook. We have all of our information there.
Cool. I can't type for nothing. Community and Friends. Hopefully I spelled everything correctly. Okay. It should be coming up. Come on, show. I'm trying to show it. Oh, now my computer is acting up. Nope. Here it is. This one. Trenton, Puerto Rican Community and Friends. Yes?
That's it. Yes.
So go to that Facebook page, Trenton, Puerto Rican Community and Friends. Go to that Facebook page, and you'll be able to find out all of the events for the entire week, and it's culminating in the Puerto Rican Parade on August 6th in Trenton, New Jersey. So Jackie, my sister, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here so much. And again, I'm looking out for your second book. I will seek to get autographed copies again for my grandchildren. And those of you who are here now or watching later, I thank you and I appreciate your support. And I encourage you to come back again next Sunday. The topic is going to be men and trauma. Men and trauma. I'm going to have a trauma expert who's going to be on talking about how trauma impacts men and the treatment for it, and how, if at all, it differs in the ways in which it shows up in men as opposed to how it shows up in women. So that's going to be a great topic, men and trauma, on next Sunday. So I will see you then. I love you all. Jackie, I'll talk to you next time. All right?
Thank you for having me, Valerie. Thank you.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.